All right, we've got more people coming in, so I think I'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Again, thank you for being here tonight. My name is Anna Withers, and I'm the Farmer and Resource Development Manager for Springfield Community Gardens. And we are a nonprofit based in Springfield, Missouri, whose vision is a community where everyone has access to healthy local food. So that's why we put on these workshops. We want to make education resources available for anyone who wants to grow their own food, whether it's for yourself or for your community, or if you want to, make a living from producing produce, vegetables, dairy, livestock, whatever it is, like we are here for you. So I will put my contact information into the chat box, and please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Springfield Community Gardens has a lot of resources and amazing people at our side who want to support growers like you. So do not be shy about reaching out about that. This workshop on building CSA is generously sponsored by the 2501 grant from the USDA Office of Partnerships and Public Engagement. And our speaker tonight is Curtis Millsap of Millsap Farms, who has been an amazing partner to Springfield Community Gardens. And we are so appreciative that he's willing to humbly share his expertise on these matters. I think you will all get a lot out of his presentation. And Curtis has gone ahead and prepared a presentation for us this evening, and he's going to join us on a Q&A afterward. So please, as you watch, feel free to post your questions to the Q&A at the bottom of your screen as you think of them, as they come up. It's totally fair. And I will keep track of everything as it comes in, and we'll be sure to answer your questions with Curtis after the presentation. So sit tight, and we will be able to chat with Curtis and, troubleshoot whatever questions that you have, because a CSA model is a really popular way of generating income for small, medium to large sized farms in our area. Just some housekeeping before we get started. Like I said, please go ahead, put your questions into the Q&A. And once you leave the workshop, a screen will pop up with a link to a post-workshop survey. And that survey is used in our reporting to the USDA and also helps us provide meaningful workshops in the future. So if you don't mind, after the workshop, please do take that survey. It'll only take a couple minutes for you to fill out, and it really does help us improve and make sure that we are delivering meaningful content for you. And if you'd like to refer to this workshop later, it will be available on Springfield Community Gardens Agriculture Workshop playlist on YouTube by the end of this week. So I'm going to put a bunch of links into the chat. Feel free to explore Springfield Community Gardens website and YouTube channel, social media, as well as Millsap Farms. And there will be an exit survey at the end. Please, if you don't mind taking a moment, just filling that out, that'd be very helpful to us. So that's all from me. I'm going to go ahead and share the presentation, and I really hope that you all enjoy it.
Hello, this is Curtis Millsap with Millsap Farms, and I'm presenting a PowerPoint about how our farm has grown our community-supported agriculture program from 2008 to 2022. Get the slideshow going here. All right, there we go. Now, so a little bit about our farm first. Because you know your doctor, you know your attorney, you know your accountant. Do you know your farmer? This is a question I love to ask our members, and I love to ask people when I give presentations. And I think it's a really important part of the story we're telling here as local food producers, is helping them understand that we're not just talking about carrots and beets and tomatoes. We're talking about the people who grow those and what all that means. So this is my family. This is a couple years old. I have a big family, as you can see. I've got 10 kids. There's one spare in here. This is my farm manager's son, Forrest, right here in the middle. But But in general, that's what they look like. I've got my oldest are now 18. I've got two 18-year-old daughters, and then they kind of scatter out down from there to Ruben, my youngest, who's 9 this year. This is where we are. We're 4 miles north of Springfield, Missouri. It's a town of about 400,000 people, so a pretty good sized metro area. And it's, kind of a lower cost of living type place. So the prices we get are sometimes reflective of that. But it's home for me and my family as well. I was raised here, and that's really what brought us back as much as anything was that we have extended family here, and the fact that land's much more reasonably priced, even though our land around us currently is around 10,000 an acre, but that's because we're basically in the suburbs. So this is our farm. Again, a couple years ago, but pretty similar to what we're doing nowadays in terms of production. So we have right at 2.5 acres of production space. We have 25 acres overall, and so we're using a very, less than right at 10% of that to actually grow our vegetables. But the key to our making that work is intensive production. And so on that 2.5 acres, we are growing enough vegetables to supply a 300-member CSA and also go to farmers market once a week, year round. And so just to put a point on that, I think it's about last year, I think our total produce sales was about $280,000. And then we have some agritourism that's not part of that number, but produce sales. So we're around, right around $100,000 an acre of produce sales. Now, some of that is supplemented as well, so those numbers are a little bit complex. But the point is, it's a very intensive structure of production, and that's part of what we'll dig into just a little bit here. But there's also a lot of other videos we have out there about that particular aspect of things, how we've really drilled down into intensive production techniques. So why did we choose to be a CSA farm? Because we could have done a lot of different things. We could have gone just to farmers markets. We've got friends who do that and do very well with it. We've got friends who just do wholesale, and that suits them just fine, and they make a good living doing that. But we'll get into that a little bit. Why? We'll talk about how did we get started. We'll talk about who were our first members a little bit, and what did we grow. And then the ultimate question here we're addressing is, how has our CSA grown from 25 to 300? First off, let me say that we love what we do. And that's part of what brought us to CSA. We really love growing vegetables, but we also love connecting with people. And so CSA would be a bad match if you're the type of farmer who doesn't really care for people that much. And there's plenty of those out there. There's plenty of people who went to the farm because they wanted to get away from daily and frequent interactions with people. But we're not one of those. My wife, Sarah, and I are both very community-oriented people. We really enjoy connecting with a diverse array of people from week to week. And so as part of that interaction, we had noticed this. There's a really serious problem right now in our culture and in our society with nature deprivation. So less time spent in nature than any other time in human history leads to a lot of bad outcomes. And here's a few examples of that, of what that can lead to. This won't be news to you who are already doing the work outside, but it's good to remember that this stuff has consequences. If people aren't connected to the outside, then there are some real consequences. And on the flip side, if we are connected to the outside, there's also benefits. And then, of course, there's also benefits of eating lots of vegetables. And I like to bring this to any presentation I give as well, that we're not just talking about a sort of subtle shift in diet or whatever. We're talking about this can A diet rich in vegetables and fruits can lower blood pressure, reduce risk of heart disease and stroke, prevent some types of cancer, lower risk of eye and digestive problems, and have a positive effect upon blood sugar, which can help keep appetite in check. This is Harvard School of Public Health. These guys are serious about vegetables, and so that's part of what brought us into this game as well. Was we love people, we love spending time with people, and we really feel passionately that that this is an important part of people living their best lives, is eating good, healthy meals, and that includes most families need to eat a lot more fruits and vegetables than they're eating. And then on a personal note, a spiritual note, I really believe this. The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. And no pun intended there. Hunger can be addressed or viewed in a lot of different ways. But in this case, the actual physical hunger, and then also that need for connection with nature, the need for connection with their food, an improved diet, and all those things. And so the other part that really compelled us to be part of CSA Farm was this, the three-legged stool of a sustainable farm. I like to use this when I give tours of the farm. I like to always mention it in presentations because it's a nice, simple way for us to to tell our story. A sustainable farm needs three legs. It needs planet, people, and profit. So planet to us is pretty straightforward. That's, I say straightforward. I mean, it's very complex, but it's one that's probably most well recognized by most people, which is we need to have some method of farming that improves the health of the environment around us. Not just even static, but hopefully actually makes a positive difference, right? So we use organic methods, which means we don't use synthetic pesticides, herbicides, or fertilizers. We focus on the health of the soil. And by doing so, that has helped us create a healthy environment around us and a healthy product. So, for example, we make lots and lots of compost. So here's some volunteers helping us unload bags of leaves so we can compost them. Here's our pigs helping us make compost. Here's this compost going out onto the soil with the help of our community members. And here's one of my daughters rolling down some beds before direct seeding. Might be after direct seeding that we've dropped compost onto. And here's the result. We get healthy, vibrant, productive crops out in the field. And these are greenhouse cucumbers, same deal. Compost fed primarily. Onions the same way. And I mention those too because those are cucumbers and onions are both crops that reward us greatly for good soil management. Having good nutrition for those two is really key. The second leg of the sustainable farm stool is people. And we feel strongly about this. We are community first. How we treat those around us reveals our heart. What we mean by that is this people thing is kind of hard sometimes to quantify, but I think it when you're there. It's one of those things that if you are ever been part of an organization that values people this way, that sees them as intrinsically valuable and worthy of love and care, then hopefully that was reflected throughout the structure of that organization, and also in the way that the leadership carried themselves, and then the way everybody feels about one another. And that's important to us. We think that people should be valued not just for what they bring to your organization, but just because they're people. Here's an example of one of our summer crews. This was a few years back when my kids were really little, but you can kind of get an idea there. We work with a pretty good size group of people and a pretty diverse group as well. Here's another workday crew here. This is probably a CSA Saturday workday. We have about somewhere between usually 8 and 20 people come out one Saturday a month and work with us. These are some early day pictures back in the when we didn't really have a proper pack shed, and so in the winter when we needed to pack, wash and pack, we would do that in the greenhouse. Here we are washing carrots with some CSA members. There's a farm camp. We do an annual farm camp where we get a bunch of youth out to the farm and let them do farm chores, let them harvest the carrots and onions and lay them out to dry or wash them and those sorts of things. And it's a neat way to interact with our community. And then ultimately, of course, if we don't meet our financial obligations, we won't be there next year. And that's where profit comes in. And so there's a lot of different ways to measure profit, but the most basic way is there money in the bank at the end of the year, and have we met all our obligations? So that means we pay close attention to what we're pricing things at, how we're selling things, um, and we keep close records on that so that we can make sure that it's all working out profitably. And we'll dig into that a little bit as well. Uh, Benefits of community supported agriculture. So the first one to us was that the farmer has stability, and that looks like financial, social, and psychological stability. Um, Meaning we have a steady income. Our income is not based on just what we harvest week to week, but it's based on the membership of our CSA members buying a share pre-season or even in the season, but then being committed to buying that each week. That's a lot of stability that you don't see in the market. When we sell stuff at farmers market, if it's going to be a rainy week or it's a cool Saturday in the week in the winter, or even a really hot Saturday in the summer, it'll cut our sales sometimes by as much as 50 to 60%. That's just not the case with community supported agriculture. Socially, we know these people who are involved with us. They are part of our social fabric on our farm and in our family. And I think there's a real hard to define but important aspect to that. So we really have enjoyed our connection with those folks over the years. And then that kind of ties into the psychological aspect of just not necessarily having to worry week to week. Are we going to make a living? Is the whole thing going to fall down? Is it a castle of cards? Instead, we've got this group of people standing around us saying, yeah, we support what you're doing. We want it to be, we think it's important, and we want it to keep going. And so what happens if you have stable farms? Well, they lead to better environmental stewardship, economic benefits to the community, and opportunities for community members' involvement. An example of better environmental stewardship is that we're able to make investments in our soil that are long-term investments that maybe wouldn't make sense like on a year-to-year basis, but knowing that we have a committed CSA membership that comes back year after year gives us some leeway to say things like we're going to invest in a more robust equipment to make and spread compost. We're going to the example this year, we're adding solar panels. We're doing that because it's the right thing to do, but the way we're able to do it financially is because we have this stable financial base that CSA has provided. And then on the other end, we provide economic benefits to the community. Specifically, we bring good, fresh, healthy, and reasonably priced vegetables into the market. And then we also pay a lot of money into our local community for wages and supplies and all those sorts of things as well. And then we have opportunities for these community members to engage with us, and that's always we kind of talked about that, but I like the fact that we employ a bunch of local youth. I like that we have people who come out and volunteer with us once a week who are retired grandmothers or whatever there's a wide diversity of people who work with us. And then, on the other side of it, if you look at the particular members, then they get a steady supply of fresh vegetables. They're connected to the farm. And this is probably one of the most important ones. They're connecting their values with their pocketbook. We always talk about that, putting your money where your mouth is. And this is exactly what people are doing when they join a CSA. They're saying, this is the type of farming I want to see in my community. This is what matters to me. And I'm willing to invest dollars into making that the standard, maybe not the standard, but to make it a viable form of agriculture. And so here's some pictures of me and Isabella when she was a little bitty, out in the field with some CSA members. There's also an apprentice there, and I love this picture because to me it kind of just sums up a lot of what this is about. This is about people having an opportunity to spend time out. These are not people who otherwise are going to be growing carrots in their backyard. These are not young people who probably have a farm experience in any other context, and they're out here on the farm enjoying and experiencing the work that we get to do every day. So how did we get started? Well, the early days of CSA on Millsap Farms, 2008 was our first year. We did a half an acre. We did 25 members, and it was our first time growing vegetables for profit. Both Sarah and I grew up in gardening families, but that was a long way from that to growing a half an acre and producing it for a sale. So this was quite a, I mean, in hindsight, kind of a foolhardy way to go about it. This is not what I recommend to anyone, that you jump into the deep end like this. But that's how we got started, and we did that knowing that it would be challenging. Our 25 members were mostly friends and family, so in some ways that was a friendly crowd, you could say. And also, on the plus side, some of those friends were very frank with feedback, so that was helpful to know, are we really meeting their needs? So that was good. Let's see here. So how do we even think that we could potentially do this? Well, we had read this book, which is a fantastic book. Elliot Coleman is a luminary in the organic market farm movement. Pretty much everybody who got started between, say, 2000 and 2010 probably started by reading Elliot's book. At least that's most of the people I've talked to who've started in that time frame. That's where they came from. Fantastic book. I also read this book, another excellent book, Sharing the Harvest. And this is Elizabeth Henderson, Robin Van Inn are both kind of early founders of CSA farms on the East Coast. And they just go through, what does it mean to be a CSA, and how does a farm go about being that? And it's full of detailed information that's really useful. Things like this: production calculations. How much could you expect out of a 100-foot bed? How long will it take to grow it? Any other considerations about how to do that? Or things like this: a CSA crop planning chart. And so this is over here, if we're planning for a CSA of 100 members and we need arugula for those folks, this is how much we want to give them per year. This is yield per row foot and annual goal per 100 shares in pounds. And of course, you can scale this back from 100 shares. And there's also similar online resources. So we used a lot of that stuff to do our initial crop planning, to figure out what we were doing. And then ultimately, of course, you just got to start putting seeds into, in this case, soil blocks or seed trays, and out into the field, and then get the work done, right? Transplant, and then eventually, of course, doing some harvest. And so here's a picture of harvest with one of our early interns. This was probably year 2 of maybe the first winter actually of CSA farming, and these little girls are now in college. So it kind of gives you some perspective on how things are going. How long we've been at this, and the changes we've seen over time. Also, somewhere along the line of in the first couple of years, we added an online service to do purchasing and to allow people to purchase and collect payments and things like that. And that was a really good tool for me. I'm not a desk guy. I'm not an office person. I'm not very good at those things, and it's not my favorite place to spend time. And so having someone else track all that stuff was very, very helpful. Not just helpful, but actually fiscally absolutely necessary. When we were doing it on paper, essentially by hand, or sometimes with a spreadsheet, it was not uncommon for us to discover at the end of the year that we hadn't billed somebody, or somebody had not paid, and we'd been delivering shares to them all summer long. And that is the wrong time to go and ask somebody to pay you. We've learned at the end of the season. We had a couple of discouraging experiences with that. You don't want to be there. So we kind of I should say that we sort of bumbled along, and how was it? Well, remarkably well, all things considered. But there were lots and lots of weeds. There were really long hours. We were profitable pretty early on, but frankly, the shares were a little sketchy. Oftentimes, we would sometimes what we were giving out was fairly low quality. Somewhere along the line, we started planning with what we called the end in mind, and we started shaping our shares pre-season. So this was done back in December of 2016. We went through and we said, what do we want all these shares to look like week to week? And so we created a page for each week, and you can see this is week 2 of Summer CSA. This is going to be May 17th of 2016. And we were going through and saying, what do we want to put in the shares? Now, this would have been really hard to do our first year or two because we didn't maybe have enough experience to even know whether it was feasible to have cucumbers in that first season, first week. Well, it wouldn't have been feasible because we didn't have a lot of protected growing space. But right away, we started covering space. We started using crop protection, and one of the things we were able to do over time was figure out, okay, these are the crops we can produce. This is how early we can produce them, and this is sort of the quantities we can produce them in, what that'll take, and then we could kind of work backwards from that and say, what do we want to put in each CSA share? So that's what this is about. This is a weekly schedule for what's going to go into the shares. And then also in year 2, actually, this was very early on, we went to a CSA workshop with Tom and Rebecca from Fair Share Farms up in Kearney, Missouri. Really wonderful growing farmers. They're super generous and did a really excellent workshop that probably saved us, because I think had we not done that workshop, I just think there's very small chance that we would have carried on with CSA in the future. It was we weren't very we were just kind of barely making it work with 25 members, and going and meeting Tom and Rebecca and seeing how they had developed their farm over the years, and tools they had grabbed from other farmers and utilized on their farm and things like that really helped us understand what that would look like on our farm and make a good plan. But one of the things they shared was this Excel sheet that I believe Tom built. It's probably been 25 years ago now, 20 years ago at least. So Tom had built this out and was very generous in loaning it to people or giving it away. And so we grabbed this and made it our own. And this is our basic planning, our basic seeding and planting plan. So this is 2022, but we've been doing this now since basically year 2. And we have the type of vegetable, how many row feet of that are going to go in, what the variety is, what sort of spacing we're going to use, how many plants are we going to need based on the spacing and the number of beds over here, which our beds are about 3 foot wide and 100 feet long. And then what type of soil block or transplant tray or whatever are we going to use, or maybe some of it's direct seeded. You can see some DS right here on this spinach. That's a direct seed. And when are we going to seed it? And that's based on our harvest date. And then one of the columns that's hidden here is days to maturity. But harvest date is what all this keys off of. And that's why it was so important to make that that week-to-week list of what we wanted to harvest, because we needed to be able to say, we want to harvest red sweet Salanova for the 15th of March so that we can put that in that box. And we never offered shares. Well, we did actually offer shares in March. So most of our shares start in May, and you can see that reflected in the plan. There's a whole bunch of things that are going to start in May. So that's how this plan works, and I'm glad to share this with anyone who would like to take a whack at it. It's a great tool. It's definitely it can be a little overwhelming. I think there's 480 entries in this spreadsheet these days, and represents about 45 different crops and something like 200 different varieties. So it's a lot of complexity to this plan. But it is, if you're going to maintain a complex plan, then you kind of have to have it in some format where it's easily usable. And every year we would do this. This was something we got from the Sharing the Harvest book, was do a survey, and I think Tom and Rebecca encouraged us to do this as well. So we would send out surveys, and some of them would look like this. Wow, that's a lot of information that this person gave us, and it was good information. It was useful, but sometimes it was just too much information. Wow, what do we do with all this information? But then there were things like this where, okay, so what were the items we did not offer that you'd like to receive next season? Oh, cauliflower. Okay. Corn on the cob. Yeah, we know that. That one's a hard one to do profitably, right? What do we give you too much of? Radishes and turnips. That's not surprising to any of you who've tried to do a CSA already. Kohlrabi, braising mix, arugula. These are things that often scored scored high on our, or scored very low in preferences. And then the things that were high, those were interesting too. So tomatoes, green beans, potatoes, tatsoi. Who would have guessed, right? Everybody loves tatsoi. Well, not everybody, but these people did. Kale. Um, and so we would have a CSA member would help us with this survey, and then they would collate the information. We fortunately had a couple of college professors who were researchers, and they were willing to do this as their work share. But here's the challenge, right? Okay, so we do this survey, and arugula. Well, 3 people would love it; it would be their favorite. 5 people, it was their least favorite. 9 of them thought they got too much. Okra would be the same way, right? Some people always want okra every time you've got it, and some people would really rather never see okra in their share. What do you do with information like that? And it's not just these odd ones like arugula and okra. Onions were in this category too, where some people just got too many, and some people got not nearly enough, and they were getting the same amount. So we used a lot of record keeping like this, try to figure out what are we selling. How many dollars worth of tomatoes did we send out through the CSA? How many dollars worth of eggplant? And these numbers were useful in terms of budgeting and understanding relative profitability, or at least relative income producing capacity of different crops, but they weren't particularly useful for share planning necessarily. And here's the we won't call it a gut kicker, but this is a hard letter to read. I'll just read it to you. Dear Curtis, thank you for running the CSA. Thank you for growing food so city folks like us don't starve. Now that the summer's completely over and I can see our first time CSA experience with a bit of hindsight, I thought I'd write a few thoughts. I don't know if they will be of any help, but here they are nonetheless. Being in the CSA introduced us to foods and recipes that we wouldn't have encountered otherwise, and we enjoyed that. Several of the veggies and some of the recipes will remain in our regular repertoire. So, what was our experience like? Over the summer, when I wasn't teaching, it was a bit like an adventure. I had time to learn, find recipes, and experiment. It was fun. Every Tuesday, if the veggies were listed on the blog, or Wednesday, if I had to wait and see what I got, I spent time figuring out how to use the veggies for that week as part of a complete set of menus. I then did the rest of the grocery shopping and cooked those meals. Most of them worked out at least reasonably well, and some were quite delicious, such as kale soup with sausage and chickpeas. Yum. By careful planning, I kept waste to a minimum. The pickup process was eased by carpooling with 2 other families, so we drove to the farm every 3rd week, and the other 2 weeks we just had to pick up from a house fairly nearby. That also worked fine for us. However, once school started, things didn't work so well anymore. I needed meals that I could cook more quickly and easily and without spending so much time looking for recipes. Also, it turned out that Keith's schedule has him teaching in Ava on Tuesday evenings this fall, and Abigail's skating lesson got moved to Tuesday evenings. Suddenly, I found myself with too much to do on Tuesday evenings: skating, pick up food, clean and organize food, and plan meals for the week, and no one to help. It was quite inconvenient, even when we just had to pick up from the other carpoolers' houses, and it was just about impossible when it was our turn to go to the farm. I began to dread Tuesdays. I also began to waste quite a bit of the food because I didn't have time to do such careful planning and so much elaborate cooking. I think we were also getting tired of some of the veggies and were just ready for a change. So overall, I would say that our experience started out positively but ended more negatively. By the end, we were no longer comfortable with the inconveniences of the pickup and planning, or having our meals largely dictated by the need to try to use the veggies from the farm. Perhaps this is just life. Many things began to wear on us after a while, but for us, the biggest factor was when Keith and I both started teaching our fall schedules. Keith going back to full-time teaching at Drury, and my return to teaching full-time homeschool. I guess the only thing I would add is this: we didn't go into this thinking we would save money. Our goal was to move to more locally produced food without spending more money, and we achieved that, or came close to it, as long as I was using all the food from the farm each week. Curtis, I don't know if what I've shared with can help you in any way, but in case, there it is. I suppose I would say that anything you can do to increase the convenience of getting and using the veggies would help. Please, more variety would help as well. Perhaps more variety. Again, thank you for what you're doing. We admire you for striving to live an integrated life that makes the world a better place. So this was a really, at the time, a hard letter to read because we didn't have good solutions for these problems. Now, some of them were manageable. So, for example, she talks about having the vegetable, knowing what's coming. Well, that seemed like maybe a surmountable obstacle. Maybe we can let people know what's coming better. We can predict that more accurately, and a couple days before, and let people know. But convenience, that's a tricky one, um, and figuring out how to let them decide what goes in their box, which is really ultimately what would solve many of our problems. That was a really hard nut to crack, and that's been the case for most CSA farmers throughout the last several decades. Is this is a really complicated thing to do. Fortunately, about that time, our service provider, the Small Farm Central, started a program called Harvey, and Harvey does this. And here's essentially what it does: when a member signs up for Harvey, they get to set their preferences, so they can go through and they can list every There'll be a list of every vegetable or fruit item we might give them. Apples, for example, and this person has rated apples as something I like a lot. I've given a smiley face. Now, if they rated it sort of neutral, then they might get them sometimes, but they won't get them all the time. And if they put them down here, they're never going to get them. Okay. Um, and you see that in this description. And then they get an email telling them what is in their box this week. That box has been shaped by their preferences, but they also have the opportunity to swap things in and out. They have a couple days to do that. And then after they've done that, and we have finalized the shares, which is the point at which they get charged, and they receive an email that says, here it comes. Your pickup location is this information, or this is from a different farm, but this is the same concept, and tells them what they're getting, where to be there, where to be, how much they got charged, and etc. It's also an interesting aspect of this that they can add things to their share easily. They can, if we have other things for sale, they can easily click those in and get charged for them. So this seemed like a really win-win for us, and it has performed for us very well for the last 5 years. This has made a big difference for our customer satisfaction, and to some degree, even for our farmer satisfaction. There are some hidden nuggets in this that are not necessarily obvious. But for example, I can now put very small amounts of produce into my boxes. So I can say I only have 10 bundles of parsley, and I can offer that, and it'll go out into boxes. Before, when I was doing a standard CSA type box, if I wanted to give out 10 bundles of parsley, that was really a kind of a hassle. It was not an easy way to make sure that got to people who would like it, and that it went. If I was rotating it through the shares, doing kind of an A/B box option, then from one week to the next, I would want to be able to monitor who got that and where I should put it the next week. That was not always easy either. So Harvey has simplified a lot of that for us. It definitely comes at a cost. It costs us about 10%, 7% toward Harvey, and 3% for credit card fees. But at this point, we're pretty satisfied with it, that it's the right solution for our farm. There are now several other vendors out there providing this type of service. So CSA Ware is the other one I'm aware of that has a choice share type option. So if you're at that point of trying to figure that sort of thing out, I would encourage you to research the options. There are definitely some really great ways to improve the customer and farmer experience here. So what does it look like right now in 2022? Right now, we're producing fresh vegetables every week for 33 weeks of a CSA season. We're working on the farm. We have our members come out and work on the farm 12 hours per year. They can come out more if they want. If they don't want to come out or they can't work it in their schedule, they can buy that out for $100 a year. So that's a pretty low hourly rate, but it is, it helps offset labor that they don't bring to us. Pick up your veggies at the farm, in town, or delivered to your door. So this was our answer to the convenience question. We now do home deliveries. We have some in-town pickups, and that's helped a lot. There are a lot of people who just have a life that does not allow them to get in the car every Tuesday and drive 4 miles up to our farm. And frankly, it's not a very efficient thing to do anyway. And so we kind of like the idea of home delivery for multiple reasons, but one of them is that it's better for the environment, really, because we're just using one vehicle to make a route that's fairly efficient to deliver these shares to people's door. We have different options depending on on their needs. So $22, $37, $55, and $75. Some of that, we've bumped those prices up considerably in the last year. Choose your own vegetables from what's available. So we kind of went through that with Harvey. And then this year, and this is the first time we're doing this, our share also includes the bread and fruit and occasionally some proteins. We haven't done that in the past. They've been separate add-on shares. And this year we're doing it as part of the regular share, so it gives us a little more flexibility and simplifies it for our customers. We hope that works. In 2021, we had 300 members. That's what we'll aim to have again this year, is about that amount. And those are, as we mentioned, varying sizes. So it's a little bit complex to say how many memberships we have if you're trying to think in terms of volume. But the average membership comes out right around that sort of middle mark. So somewhere between the $37 and $55 mark. Here's just a picture of the beauty out in the fields and what's going on. You can see at the bottom here, there's kind of a display of what the different size shares might look like. These are spring shares. Obviously, we got a little asparagus in there. We got a zucchini from really early covered zucchini, some cucumbers as well, cherry tomatoes from really early. So this is like a May, probably second or third week of May share. Flowers are also now a big part of our CSA offering. I think we sold about $15,000 worth of flowers through the through the CSA last year. Another example of this is probably a fall winter share. So we've got some ginger in here. So this would be like November, December maybe. And sweet potatoes, onions, winter squash. There's some bread over here. There's some spinach. That might be tatsoi. Head lettuce, celery, celeriac, beets, carrots. Another example of a kind of a high summer share, so tomatoes, corn. This corn we probably raised. We do supplement some corn as well because we can't really raise corn profitably. And these are what we would call, traditionally would have been all add-on shares. So people could buy eggs, cheese, flowers, bread, fruit as add-ons, and included also there is a beef share and a chicken share and a lamb share. So people have a lot of options to add to their shares. And we kind of got into that partly because we just wanted people to be able to eat a good diet all around, that their good eating habits wouldn't be limited just to vegetables. And so that's how we've done that for years. This year we're transitioning to the bread and the fruit being part of the share. If that works well, then we may continue with that trend with the eggs and cheese and even the meat next year. It will simplify our planning process some for it to be that way, and it will potentially simplify the purchasing process for the members as well, and potentially boost overall share values. All right. So how do we get here from where we started in 2008? Well, there's this cycle: plan, execute, evaluate. Plan, execute, evaluate. Plan, execute, evaluate. And that's really important. So the plan is what we've represented here before. And here's one way of sorting this plan, right? So here's the arugula plantings. Most of the arugula plantings for this would have been, this is 2022, so this is coming up. But this is a plan we followed last year as well. So the plan right now is every time we plant arugula, we're planting a bed of arugula until we get down here to the end of the season when we're just planting half beds in tunnels. But this full bed of arugula gets seeded on February 5th for harvest on the 2nd of March, etc., on down through here. And really what we're doing when we do this is we're keying off our harvest date. So what we'd like to be able to do is harvest a bed of arugula every week. And how did we decide that? Well, we'll come to that, how we decided that was the right number for us. But that's how this plan works, is it lays out our plantings over time and gives us quantities and then the expected harvest date. Once that plan is being enacted, so we're planting the arugula, now each week we're gonna walk the fields, we're gonna figure out what's available to be harvested. And I'm gonna show you, well, maybe I might, let's see. No, I guess I'm not. So this is a screenshot from Harvey. And the way Harvey works is we enter a harvest estimate. So we're gonna go through, we're gonna say collard greens, and we have about, must have been a pretty slim week. So we had 5 bundles of collard greens. They're going to go out at $3 a piece. So there's $15 worth of value there. And then as we add in our items, we can keep an eye on the bottom here. I'll move myself out of the way. we can keep an eye on the bottom here. This target value is how many vegetables, the dollar value of the vegetables we have pre-sold. So, all of our shares that are supposed to go out this week. And then this number is how many dollars worth of vegetables we're offering so far. And we'll keep adding things in. And, our ideal is that this number here is at least 30% over what we need. So so it should be, I guess in this case, about $3,000 worth of value offered, total value, we would say, with a target value of $2,269. So we make that plan, we execute the plan, we go and figure out what we can harvest, we harvest it, we send it out the door, we sell it, and then over time, we create this data set. And this is a really cool piece of information that we get from Harvey. We've done this manually to some degree as well before we had Harvey, but it's a good tool. And that is, we can say, we offered 30 bags of arugula. 100% of that was taken on the 5th of April. On the 3rd of May, we offered 90 bags of arugula, and only 35 bags were taken, and that's a 38%, and so on down the line here. And so what we learned from this is, if we're using this for planning, well, early season people do want arugula, but they really, out of our 100 at this time, when we wrote this in 2019, we were around 150 members. Really only about 30 bags to 35, 40 bags of arugula a week. It's kind of what we can get out the door. And so that's what we aim for now when we're growing. We say, 30 to 40 bags a week is really where that's kind of our sweet spot. Now, we did also notice, and you can tell seasonally, it's kind of interesting to watch, that as we get into October, things get cooled down. People are more interested in arugula. There's more value there for them. And so we kind of try and shape our plantings that way. In the middle of June and July, when there's tons of tomatoes and cucumbers and squash and green beans and sweet corn, people are a lot less interested in the arugula. But early spring, late fall, that's a good crop. Here's another example where we can see on our bell peppers, sort of the same pattern. Okay, so early bell peppers do really well. But what we noticed on the bell peppers was really, even when we had some really high numbers down here in the end of the summer and early fall, and this is a little bit of a confusing thing because at this point we were running a much smaller CSA in the fall, so these numbers are less useful. But here you can see we were putting 54 pounds of bell peppers a week into shares, and all of them were going. I mean, virtually 58 and 98%. So this let us know we have capacity to expand our bell pepper production. People will buy more bell peppers than what we're bringing to the market. I mean, and the market meaning the CSA shares. And part of the reason that I think this is interesting is this is not data you can really get if you're doing a standard boxed CSA. This really only works in the case of a choice CSA like we're doing with Harvey, because otherwise you never really know what people want. And this addresses that whole thing we were talking about. There's beets is a great thing up here, right? So we finally figured out, that we want about 30 bundles of beets a week is kind of where our sweet spot is. And if we have much more than that, it doesn't go out the door. And if we have much less than that, all of them go out the door, and some people are missing their beets. So this sort of data is really, really useful for fine tuning our crop plan, right? So we're not like blanket planning. We're like tuning the dials a little bit. Let's turn up the bell peppers a little bit. Let's turn down the arugula mid-season a little bit. Let's turn the bok choy down quite a bit, unfortunately. I love growing bok choy, but there's not that many people who like eating bok choy compared to the numbers of people that like head lettuce, for example. So these are what we've used over the years to tune our crop plan, data like this. And then this is another interesting aspect, and this is overall value offered per week. Let's get down here into May, where it makes the numbers are more useful, where we start CSA. So we had, in the first week of May, when we did our first CSA, we had $3,500 worth of produce offered, and we only sold $2,300 worth of shares. So we had this much unused value over here. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? That's a lot of unused value. Now, we do farmers market, so most of that value probably went to farmers market and sold, but it tells us that we've got room to expand our CSA within that time frame. Now we look at the very next week and we go, oh, okay, we kind of skimmed it a little closer the next week. Well, that's only about let's see, 5. That's only about less than 15% margin there. That's not what we want to be running. So we need to not do that again. But that also helps us know this is a week when things get a little slim. We might bump up our production that week a little bit, or maybe we're going to consider whether we would supplement with other people's produce in that week as well. That might be a good opportunity for them and for us. And then you get down here into the bulk of the summer, and we realized we have a lot of capacity. I mean, based on what we're offering, we're only selling about 50% of the produce that we could be selling to our CSA. And this was really a watershed moment. This was 2019. We looked at these numbers and went, oh my goodness, we could be selling a lot more CSA shares. And I don't know if we ever would have realized that without having data collection that was refined enough to really see these numbers. And this data collection came from Harvey. So again, that 10%, but then again, what are we paying for? Well, this is part of what we're paying for is our understanding of our own business model and where our strengths and weaknesses lie. And so this is really valuable. So this helped us also know, okay, we really need to drill into production in September, October, so we can hit those weeks bigger. We can back it off a little bit here in the middle of July and August when it's hot and hard to keep things healthy anyway, and dial in our fall production a little closer, get that turned up, get the volume turned up a little bit there, and we'll be in better shape. So that then year to year has tuned the way that our crop plan works. And so here you can see head lettuce, for example, and you can see that our head lettuce numbers shift a little bit over time. And that shift reflects two things. One, it reflects our realities of figuring out what we can grow when, but it also reflects the demand that we've seen in our CSA. And one of the things that we realized was early season and late season, we can sell all the head lettuce. I mean, a lot of head lettuce. And in the middle of the summer, we can sell a good bit, but actually it does taper off when people have access to a whole bunch of other bulky fruit type of crops. All right, so that's how we've tuned this thing over time. Now, in addition to changing the plan, there's a couple other things we've really invested in. And one of those is people. We've spent a lot of time trying to find the right people, and then not just find the right people, but also bring the people who we are working with along in terms of skills and abilities, increasing their salaries and their training and all those sorts of things over time. And I think that's really important. This is part of why we get into farming. Most of us, is we like working with a crew, whether that's a big crew or small crew. But when we invest in them, it tells them how much we value them, and it also tells them that the work, learning to do the work better, is something that we value as well. To try not to, this is probably year 2. And so you can see, this is what I mean when I say there were a lot of weeds. I mean, that was actually a growing field. And I can't believe that we're planting whatever those are. I'm not sure actually what they're planting there into these beds that are so full of Johnson grass and nasty things and all that. But anyway, c'est la vie. Also, this is our friend Patrick Byers. We've invested a tremendous amount of time in education. And Patrick is an extension professional here in Webster County now, but near Springfield. And we've spent a lot of time with Patrick and other educators at workshops and conferences, investing in our own education as farmers. Both myself and my farm manager, Kimby, and my wife, Sarah, we've all spent time at these events or doing online things or reading books, whatever the case, to hone our craft, right? It's worth doing. And we also invested a lot of time and energy in figuring out better production, specifically weed control. This was kind of early stuff we were doing. We did a lot of plastic mulch in the early years. We don't do that anymore. We've gotten away from plastic mulch. It's a good system in many ways. It just didn't fit a lot of the things we liked about our farm, and so we've given that up. But whatever the case, dialing in production, and which includes weed control, In fact, it's one of the most important parts of vegetable production, I would say. Um, that's really been an important aspect of how we did this over the years. Crop protection, this is huge. We now have about a quarter of our space, in fact, almost a third of our space is under cover now. Whether that's high tunnels or greenhouses or low tunnels, but anything that gives you a roof overhead and a little bit of temperature moderation is a huge advantage when you're trying to make a plan that works, despite or because of different weather variables. We've invested a tremendous amount of money and time and resources into building our soil. Here in the Ozarks, what we call soil is oftentimes a little too clay, a little too rocky, a little too sticky for it to really be good vegetable growing soil. So we have built huge amounts of compost on farm. We've purchased a lot of compost. We've grown a lot of cover crops. This is a long-term game, right? But that said, if you look into some of the sort of luminaries in the market farming world right now, most of them talk about creating the soil on their farm. And that was kind of our moment of revelation, was when we visited Elliott Coleman's and saw that what had been at one time granite boulders and blue clay in this under this forest that he cleared to build his farm had turned into potting soil by Elliott's amendments and work on that over the years. And that's has made his farm tremendously profitable and successful in so many ways. And that's why, because he invested in that soil, recognized that as the foundation of growing. And of course, that's fundamental. But sometimes sometimes we have this idea that we're stuck with what we've got, and it's just simply not true. On a market garden scale, we can definitely amend our soil in a significant way and create a much more robust growing base for our plants, which makes our lives easier, right? Makes the weeds pull easier, makes us have less weeds, makes the carrots grow straighter, makes the tomatoes grow bigger, all that stuff. We've also invested a lot of time and energy into the pack shed, both in terms of efficiency and cleanliness. One of the common bits of feedback we got a lot back in the day was that our produce wasn't quite the quality and cleanliness that people wanted to see. And that was understandable, because we were kind of figuring out as we went, and we were doing a lot of I'd say run and gun type of stuff, just kind of getting it done as quick as we could. And so that meant that oftentimes what was going out the door was not really very clean, or the quality, a few bug bites here, or maybe it's a little bolted in one place or another, if there was cabbages or things like that. So what we've dialed in on was quality in the field, but then also that the pack shed efficiency and cleanliness. And so designing a pack shed that's really made for product to move through it. There's a couple of videos on our YouTube channel that kind of dig into what we've done over the years to dial in efficiency in the pack shed. But it's really, really important. Pack shed, harvest and post-harvest is where you're going to spend about 50% of your time and energy. And that's just a huge amount of time and energy to spend on something that most farmers don't really recognize as part of growing, because it's not, it's not part of the actual growing process, but it's absolutely key to that third P of the sustainable farm, which is profitability. If you don't have a system that gets your product quickly, efficiently, and effectively from a field state to a clean, ready for market, and then out the door and cash coming in type of situation, then you're really not market farming. You're just growing a big compost heap, because anybody can produce something in the garden and just pile it up and watch it rot. But you have to really have some savvy, market savvy, to get it clean, cold, and then out the door to the customers and bring cash in, because ultimately that's what makes sure that we're in business the next year. So all that to say, that's a big investment we've made. Other things along those lines, we've done a lot of work on irrigation. We've added a lot of irrigation lines over the years, so that's now a much simpler process than it originally was, because we realized we were having a lot of losses from improper irrigation or lack of irrigation. We've also spent some amount of money on equipment and machinery, probably sometimes more than we should have, but at the same time, we're pretty thrifty. So we drive a 35-year-old tractor, 32-year-old tractor, and it's a little 27 horsepower Ford with a front loader, but it gets the job done for us. I know other farms who have invested a lot more in machinery and equipment, but we have generally spent kind of the resources that we might have used on that more on our soil and composting operation, so that we simplify our hand labor. So if that makes sense, we do use machines to move all the compost out onto the beds now and things like that. So we've invested in machinery when it made sense within my paradigm, but I'm not a tractor farmer in the sense of wanting to cultivate crops by tractor or grow on that kind of scale. A 2.5 acre market garden, getting a tractor out to cultivate doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So we don't do that. Other places we've invested, obviously we've invested in the platform. So, Small Farm Central and then Harvey both had a cost, and those costs have returned things to us. For example, customer service on the part of Harvey is really excellent. It wasn't always that way. They've improved that drastically, but they handle about, I would say, at least 7 out of 10 customer service inquiries without me ever having to get involved. So if there's an email, there's a 70% chance that Harvey's going to be able to handle that without ever asking me a question. I'm in the loop. I know what's going on, but I don't have to spend that time at the desk necessarily answering those emails or calls. And so, yeah, so that's another place we've invested. And then I think, the choice aspect of Harvey is a really big part of our how our CSA works nowadays. And I think I really think it's helped a lot in terms of retention. It's hard to prove that because we've also been growing each year. And I think we're kind of done growing. So it may be interesting now as we stabilize our numbers to see how our retention statistics hold up. But they've been, for the last several years, we've had no trouble filling our CSA share, filling our membership. And that's a good thing. So with that said, I think it's a good time to stop the production, this video presentation, and now we'll transition to a live Q&A. So thanks for watching the presentation, and yeah, I'm ready to answer whatever questions you might have.
All right. Excellent. Let me just close that out. Hi, Curtis. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Very good, very good. And we do have some questions for you.
Great.
The first one, just being a general acknowledgement. Thank you for sharing that letter from the CSA members. I think that kind of reflects the culture around food and just, the need for families and quick meals. And that's such a hard position to be in when you want to be supporting local agriculture. You want to be giving your family the best food, but it's really hard sometimes when, you're just given this full raw produce and you have to plan your meals around it. So I just really appreciate the humility and the honesty of sharing that letter. And I think that's an issue for so many people. But that also represents a transition, especially in a place like Springfield, where we have such a rich agricultural history, but also our culture is very focused around fast food, quick, easy, conveniency. And I really felt with the people who shared that letter with you because it was very honest and it wasn't anything against you or your CSA. It was just a matter of life circumstances. So I don't know. I just wanted to comment, thank you for sharing that. I thought that was very beneficial. And I think, maybe there's no perfect solution right now, but it just shows the position that people are in, and we have to acknowledge that if we want to encourage people eating healthy local food.
Exactly so. Yeah. And it did shape our CSA in that it really pushed us toward a choice model It made us consider home delivery and do that. You know, it helped us see the places where our customers were really struggling to make the thing work. And and the other thing that came along was Harvey does a recipe, offers a recipe to them each week, several recipes based on what's actually in their share. So we had done a little bit of that, but that took a lot of time and energy on our part, which was sort of the challenge of it, right? Was, I mean, you can imagine how to do a choice CSA by having people call you and tell you what you want, but that sounds like a nightmare, right? So, you know, letting the computers do what computers do best, and including generating recipes and things like that. So that's really helped a lot. You know, we've got a lot of members who rejoined after we started doing a choice program, and also a lot of members who just wouldn't be able to do this. So it's kind of neat to find ways to meet them where they are and realize, like, I think they're initially, I mean, just honestly, as a farmer, sort of my initial response to that sort of email or letter is like, oh, come on, you know, get over it. And then you realize, like, no, these are, I mean, this is totally legitimate stuff. These people have lives, and they, you know, spending an hour a week going and getting a basket of vegetables from a local farm is not really necessarily a good use of their time or resources. And so why can't we meet them where they are? And so that's, yeah, that's been a really, it's been a really freeing thing to realize, like, oh, okay, I don't have to follow some sort of conventional model. I can figure out how to meet my customers where I want to meet them.
Right. Meeting people where there are is super important, but also realizing it's like, you know, whether you are going out and getting fast food every meal, that takes time. Everyone has to grocery shop a little bit, like that takes time. So
Yeah.
I think it's kind of rejiggering how people view acquiring the food that they cook at home. You know, and this is for Springfield, it's kind of a relatively new model. It's not been very popular. So thank you for having such a strong CSA that people can rely on and go to. And, you know, you really are right now, you are a successful model for other folks in the Ozarks. So that's good. We can only try. And, you know, no shame in anyone getting groceries and feeding their families however they can and whatever works for them. We did have one question about what proportion of your revenue does come from the CSA.
Yeah, so overall farm, produce sales wise, let's start with that number. So produce sales wise, it's about 70% of our produce sales happen through the CSA. So it's a pretty high percentage. I think we could actually go higher, but it is nice to have the outlet of the farmer's market, because if we have, you know, a bumper crop of lettuce, 350 heads of lettuce to sell in a week, and we have only, you know, 200 shares going out that week, it really doesn't make sense for us to try and push those all out to the CSA. So it's nice to have the farmer's market as a continued outlet. On top of that 70-30 split, we also have another, let's think about how to state this clearly. Well, just to put it in real numbers, so we have like $270,000 to $280,000 worth of produce sales, and then another $60,000 to $70,000 worth of agritourism. So, and that's the pizza night primarily, and then some farm tours and things like that tossed in there as well. So you know, I guess that makes the overall produce sales about 80% of our farm income, and another 20% coming from the other income streams related to agritourism.
Which is so important. That's something we talk a lot about at Springfield Community Gardens, is the need to diversify, obviously. So that's good. You have CSA, you have wholesale, and you have farmers market sales and agritourism. So would you say those are the four main streams?
Exactly. And we do very little wholesale anymore. We kind of, for a while there, we did a lot of grocery store, or, you know, a fair bit of grocery stores and restaurants. And that kind of dropped off just organically over the last, say, 6 or 7 years. And I think it's a piece we could pick back up if we ever need to, but at this point, all of our marketing is really geared more toward that CSA and market and farmers market, direct to final consumer. I've got good friends who are really nailing the wholesale market, and so I see that it's a different skill set, it's a different setup in many ways, and so I think we're in a good place doing what we do right now. But it's interesting to think that it's not a permanent thing. We could definitely transition if we needed to, just in the way that a lot of growers transitioned aggressively when the pandemic hit. A lot of growers went from selling exclusively to grocery stores or mostly restaurants to pivoting to going, okay, we're gonna. So, as a entrepreneur, you've always got to be ready to figure out what's the next thing. If one thing that you've been doing kind of starts to slip or fail.
I'm sure it's nice having that flexibility. For sure. That adds a little, bit of security for you. Another question that we had was just simply, what items do you grow for CSA versus items you grow otherwise? Like, are there certain crops that you know will be popular with CSA versus things that aren't popular with CSA, but you still grow them because they're good money makers elsewhere?
Yeah. And it's almost the opposite, where for CSA because people expect them or just desire them, and that wouldn't make sense otherwise. Sweet corn is a good example of that. On our scale, sweet corn doesn't make the dollars per square foot. So our metric in the typical market garden scenario is $4 a square foot. That's what we'd like to see per season. And we can hit that pretty easily with head lettuce, especially if we can, because we can do at least 2 successions and something like that. Flowers, usually meet the mark pretty handily. Sweet corn just doesn't do it. I mean, you can't plant enough sweet corn in a small enough space if we can do a second crop, then maybe that sort of helps with that. But the fundamental problem is just that there's limited dollars per square foot. Now, if we had more space, on the flip side, sweet corn's a fairly low labor crop, except even the harvesting is really pretty straightforward and goes pretty fast. So I don't think that it's a non-starter for everyone, but that's why we grow sweet corn, is because our CSA members really want sweet corn. And so we supplement some sweet corn, but some years we have a hard time finding non-GMO sweet corn. So it's all genetically modified to be poisonous to caterpillars. And we've, one of the base commitments we make to our membership is that we will not ever provide them with a genetically modified food. So there you go. Other things that would kind of fit. I used to say green beans were in that category, but actually green beans the pricing has changed on green beans since we started growing, and we're now getting enough green beans that it makes sense as a market crop as well. But for several years there, for a direct sales, and so we kind of grew. We thought of them as sort of I don't quite know what to call those, but make the CSA members happy kind of crops. And then there are other things like kohlrabi or okra, small quantities of those that we're really going to be able to sell at market. And our CSA members do a pretty good job of taking those when they're available. It's still not going to be a crowd favorite necessarily, but you can move a few of them, and it's kind of fun because it allows, and also keeps us keeps some interesting things in the CSA baskets, if that's a way to say it. And those aren't necessarily bad financially. They just are crops that maybe we wouldn't be able to grow nearly as many of them if we were just doing markets. Even if we were selling the same amount of produce that we sell through everything, I don't think that the markets would move proportionally the same amount of those sort of rare vegetables or less common vegetables if we were of that idea that you're going to build them a box no matter what. And sometimes that box is going to have a head of fennel in it, and they can swap it out if they really don't want to have it. But sometimes just being in their box is enough for them to go, oh, I'll try that. And that's one of the things people really like about a CSA is having a little adventure. Not too much adventure, like you remember in that letter. Mostly green beans, corn, tomatoes, cucumbers, head lettuce make people very happy. But an occasional head of fennel, occasional kohlrabi, an occasional bundle of beets, keeps people pleased as well. So.
That's been my experience with CSA. I'm from Springfield originally, but I moved to Chicago for the last decade, and I was there, but I came back now. But I will say Chicago has a prolific farmers market situation, and there are farmers from all around that come. I had not tasted sorrel. I really hadn't eaten beets. Like, there are so many interesting herbs and crops that I did not know existed until I started picking up CSA there, and it was an adventure every week. It was like, oh, what the heck is this? Let me figure out how to use it. But it was really fun, and I think that's a fun challenge for people.
Yeah.
When and if you have the time, and you have at least a little bit of the expertise to figure it out and put it to use. So I really enjoyed that too. And that actually leads into the next question we had about just what are higher dollar money making crop versus the less profitable crops, and is it all just dependent on preference and what the market wants this year versus the next year?
Yeah, that's a great question. It does shift with time, and it shifts with time partly because the prices are a good example where we used to be selling green beans for like $1.50 a pound. Well, at $1.50 a pound, it's hard to make money growing green beans, and the market for green beans has just risen and risen until now. It's reasonable to charge between $3 and $4 a pound for green beans. That totally changes the equation, right? I mean, now it makes a lot more sense to pick green beans. So that said, the basic standards have not changed that much. Tomatoes always top out in any profitability metric, even with the high degree of labor and high perishability of tomatoes. They just the economics on tomatoes are really good. Head lettuce the same way. Herbs, that's kind of a sneaky one that most people don't necessarily think of, but basil, parsley, chives, mint, oregano, thyme. There's probably a couple others that I'm missing right now, but all those are, cut and come again. They stay there for a long time. Most of them are perennial, or can be perennialized depending on where you're growing them. And then you've got, you can come and cut off that same patch without having to do anything to it. Maybe occasionally weeding, but mostly not doing much to it. Again and again, and every time you cut it, you're getting a $2 bundle, $2.50 bundle off of that. That adds up really quick to a highly profitable square footage for a fairly low labor input and so on. Of course, sprouts and microgreens are shoots in the wintertime, which is really our only foray into that arena. And we've tried sprouts, we've tried a little other kinds of microgreens. This is a really different type of growing, and it requires a really high, I feel like a high maintenance level in terms of keeping things sterile and clean and so on. So we really have not done much of that other than the pea shoots. We do pea shoots throughout the winter, and they're a nice one to have. And actually, we even do them through the summer because they do fairly well through the summer. And it's sometimes in August, it can get a little hard to have anything green and crunchy in the shares. And pea shoots are kind of a nice thing to toss in there at that point. But they're very high dollar. You look at a tray of pea shoots and you're looking at less than 2 square feet, and you're going to harvest like $12 to $15 worth of pea shoots off of that space, and you're going to that same space like maybe 20 times in a year. That's pretty crazy dollars per square feet. So it really fits in a greenhouse space. And cucumbers, greenhouse cucumbers or field cucumbers, either one really, are a high dollar crop. Summer squash can be pretty good. the ones on the other end of the spectrum, I would say okra, melons, winter squash. We used to say potatoes. I think potatoes are still kind of on the fence for us. Our pricing has gotten better on potatoes, but we're still having trouble getting the yields that we need for that to make sense square footage wise. But on the other hand, potatoes are a pretty low labor crop until harvest time. So that's kind of nice. It's usually not a lot of effort to grow those. So that's kind of a short list. But the standard big ones are always herbs, greens, tomatoes, cucumbers, sprouts, or greens, things like that. I mean, sprouts are micro. Carrots are another one I shouldn't forget to mention. Carrots and beets have been really good for us, and we've invested quite a bit of time and energy and resources into learning how to grow those well, and that's made a huge difference. Water and compost and all those things. If you're growing 350 pounds of carrots in that bed, or if you're growing 100 pounds of carrots in that bed. So that's, one of those places where getting better at your practice makes a huge difference in your profitability. It's just kind of, it's a snowball effect of it. The more effort you put into learning what you're doing and practicing that and then revising and getting better and so on, the more profitable it becomes and the easier it becomes. So that's another good example of that. But yeah, those are the big ones.
Okay, that's very good to know. Thank you for sharing that. And we have someone asking, what's a good amount of vegetables to put in a box for a starter CSA?
Yeah. And of course, this is a slippery number. And this is the question, the most common asked question by people who want to sign up for CSA is, what's going to be in the box? How big is the box going to be? And that's a great question. So we do it value-based, which means that if you buy a $33 box from us, you're going to get $33 of vegetables every week. And we base that pricing on the farmer's market. We never overload their boxes by more than maybe $1, and we never short them more than maybe $1. There are lots of farmers who don't really do that, who load their boxes up based on what's available, and they may load them up huge and heavy one week, and then a couple of weeks later it might be a little light. We used to do that. Our members were pretty clear that one of the problems they had was too much produce, so we don't ever overload their boxes, which makes sense from a business perspective too, right? I mean, it didn't cost you, may or may not have, but you can't go around measuring that and then saying this is what's going in the box. So we set the price, we matched we make our values, and we arrive at those prices somewhat based on cost, but then also somewhat based on value, meaning I might like to sell one for $1.50, but no one's going to pay me that. I can do $1, and that works. So that's the tricky part, is figuring out what your price, what your value, what your corn, beans, tomatoes are worth to people. And that's somewhat regional. I've got friends who sold heirloom tomatoes for years up in the Kansas City area for $7 a pound. And, I just don't think that's a viable price here in the Ozarks. We push $5 at the market, and that's, we think that's kind of pushing the edge of the envelope based on our sales numbers and things like that. That's kind of where we've settled. So that's just, sorry, that was the economics of it. The other way to answer that is just volume wise. I usually expect a full CSA share from our farm to fill and I always have trouble with this. I always want to call it a ream of paper, but that's not the right term. The ream, so like a case of paper. It was just a handy number or a handy size.
That is a ream. You are right, but I don't think that's common enough for people to understand.
Okay.
A ream is a full box, not just one.
So when you say, a box full of paper, okay.
A banker's box.
All right, good. I was using the right terms. That's great. There you go. Yes. So that's, most people have that kind of, that scale in mind. So you say that and you go, oh, okay, that helps. Now, and I also say sometimes that box will be less full because it'll be heavy objects that are high value. So, you may get a bunch of carrots and tomatoes and cucumbers, and they're going to be a little more dense, and they're still, the value is still there, but the box is going to be a little bit less full. And then sometimes in the early spring, your box may overflow because it's, 2 heads of lettuce and a bundle of kale and so on, and everything may be a rough idea. It's going to be about a paper box, a ream of paper of produce, and that's useful. But yeah, my best advice on that is always, base it on value. How many dollars worth of vegetables you're going to put in that box. Be disciplined around that. There's really no reason to overfill or underfill a box based on the economics, because there's another really important thing, and I'll stop myself, but a really important concept that we had to think about a couple of years back was a CSA has often been seen as something that might have a discount attached to it. And people think that way because they think, well, I'm pre-purchasing. And that's kind of a common idea, right? If you pre-purchase something and you buy in bulk, then you might get a discount. But the other end of that is you're providing a premium service with that CSA. So you're box each week. I mean, I'm giving them that adventure, right? I'm going to put a head of kohlrabi in. I'm going to put a head of fennel in. You're also making sure that what they get is exciting and interesting to them. So, or it fits their needs. And so you're going to make sure that you grow things that fit their needs. And so there's extra effort there. If I were just growing for market, I would probably not grow nearly as many crops as I grow, but I grow a wider variety because I want to keep those CSA members happy and interested and so on. And then I'm also really working hard at communication with CSA members. I'm writing them in a weekly newsletter. I'm answering their emails and phone calls. You know how many phone calls and emails I get from people at the farmers market? Like almost none, right? So there's not that service component there. So all of that to say, the CSA is a premium product. When you buy a CSA, you're buying vegetables and you're buying a relationship to the farm. And I hope that doesn't sound crass. That's not what I mean at all. But you are, that's part of what you're asking for when you sign up for a CSA. You want to be connected to the farm. And so it's okay for farmers to say, this is an extra service. This costs me a little more to do this way. And so all that to say, I don't ever discount produce to put in a CSA box. And in fact, in certain circumstances, our CSA prices will be slightly higher than there's just no profit way to grow this thing. We may bump the price up a little bit for CSA because we know they want it. It's a desired product. And now, especially, I think with our ability to offer people choice and they can see what they're paying and so on, I feel really good about that we're being transparent enough that if people want, that funky crop that's going to cost a little extra and they're willing to pay for that, then that's fine to put it in their box. So that was a long-winded answer, but yeah, I think it is important to consider that we are not, we're not in the discount business.
Absolutely. And I think, that must be so hard, is managing people's expectations. And it's all relative. Everyone has a different idea of value in what they're getting for their money, when of course you can go to Walmart and fill the same size box and maybe get something at a portion of the price, but it's a different product. So exactly. I'm sure
it is a different product. And the best answer to that is always say, of course you can, and no one is stopping you from going to Walmart. It's fine, and economic realities are what they are. This is what it costs us to grow this and have support our families and pay for our land and be good stewards and all these things. And that's a great conversation to have with people, and there's no harm in having it at all. But ultimately, just make sure that you're at a place price-wise that you feel good about, not just because it makes you feel good that you're feeding people for cheap, but because you know that in the long term, it's going to support all the things you need to have money for as well.
Exactly. I'm glad we have you as a partner to help explain those nuances. And we have one final question, and it's a little bit off topic, but also very relevant and very important. It's about your advice on beginning a composting regime. And I just want to say, I hope this person does reach out and follow Springfield Community Gardens and Millsap Farms on social media. You can sign up for both of our newsletters because we do put out a lot of information and workshops on composting and soil health, regenerative agriculture, and we do try to really put out a lot of information about this. So thank you for your interest in this question. It's super important. And the best person to answer it is definitely Curtis. So any advice you have about beginning a composting regime, please.
And a little shout out to Rebecca too, because she interned with me last summer, so she's the one asking that question. You know, the thing about starting composting is there's a couple really important things to consider, Rebecca, as you guys toy with. Well, no, I won't say toy with, as you get started in composting. The big one is that composting can be an absolute stinky, slimy mess, full of flies and all sorts of nastiness. And I know, you know, you may be contemplating that down at C of O. The idea of composting food scraps is a wonderful thing. You just need to make sure that you have a really high carbon source that is reliable, that's always accessible. So our carbon source is that's for us. We have wood chip crews. Those are tremendous because as soon as you mix a high nitrogen source, you know, so something like food scraps or manure or coffee grounds, or I mean, there's a whole host of things, you know, that when immediately mixed with carbon, they become slimy, stinky, nasty messes pretty quickly. And so we always want to have enough carbon on hand to mix that thoroughly, and that's both a odor control and then also just good composting. I mean, we don't want those slimy things to go anaerobic and start getting growing weird, you know, sort of sulfurous compounds and things, which is part of what the smell is. So, and then of course we also need them to get covered so that we don't have a fly problem. Because if you don't have enough carbon, you will invariably have massive amounts of flies. I mean, it's not complicated, right? But if you have a big pile of poop, you cover it over with you know, a bunch of wood chips, mix it in, and then have a nice wood chip covering, then that totally changes the attraction to the flies, and now you've got a great compost pile instead of a manure pile that's going to cause an insect problem. So that's the best thing to remember as far as getting started. Other things to think about are, how are you going to clean containers? What's the expectation in terms of returning those containers to like a cafeteria or some other food you know, institution? How clean do those need to be going back in the door? And how are you going to accomplish that? How are you going to accomplish that in all kinds of weather? You know, so that's it's easy enough in the summertime to have a hose nearby. In the wintertime and below freezing, okay, how does that container get cleaned? Because now you got frozen water lines and things like that. Another thing to think about is, what scale are you going to operate on, and then do you have appropriate machinery to operate on that scale? I mean, if you're doing composting bins in pallet-sized, you know, kind of a square pallet composting bin, no reason that can't be done by hand. That's, you know, a very, very human scale project. You start making bigger windrows, and, you know, now, you know, on our farm, of course, we're doing windrows that are 10 foot tall and 100 feet long. I mean, that's clearly not a hand scale thing. Now we need a tractor or a skid steer or something that we're going to use to move that material around and get started in anything like this. It's just the space really, really is important, how it lays out, where it is, and then where does it drain, frankly. Because compost has leachate. It's a small scale, it's not much of a problem, but you start getting into a larger scale, any sort of food composting, and there's issues there where you need to make sure that you're catching that in some sort of reservoir, keeping it in the space where it belongs, and not ending up in a stream or in a, I mean, wherever, you know, you don't want it running through the campus either. So so thinking about where that's going to end up, because as soon as it rains, you're going to have that. There's a lot more nuance to it, obviously, but those are things I would consider starting up. There is a really great book called Community Scale Composting that's just a wealth of information, and very appropriate for, like, you know, larger farms or people who want to do food waste. I've gotten a lot of good information out of it. And then, of course, there's tons of information on composting as well out of several universities. Michigan State has done some really good work on composting of food waste out of cafeterias in particular, both with traditional composting methods and also vermicomposting, which is a really cool way to handle a lot of food waste. So there you go, community scale composting. So on that, and I know there's a couple of YouTube videos on our channel, Millsap Farms. I also think there's some for Springfield Community Gardens about composting on different scales. So, check those out on the YouTubes. But also, if you have, as you get closer to having composting experience, come meet with you and help troubleshoot some of those basic problems and make sure that you got a plan in place that's going to succeed. The quickest thing that shuts down community composting is usually when somebody doesn't quite think these things through, and it's a stinky, slimy mess covered in flies and mice, and people go, "Oh no, this is horrible!" And then and that's a sad way for a composting project to end. But it's all too common because it's easy to have happen. So,
Is your
those
farm,
are my thoughts initially, anyway. But
yeah, is your farm
go ahead.
large enough? Like, do you have to worry about those problems? I'm wondering about just the scale of what's large and what's small.
Yeah, no, I would say, I mean, our farm, size wise, we're not that large, but our composting operation is outsized for the amount of produce we grow. We produce, I really should try harder to quantify it, but my guess is we're producing somewhere between 600 and 1,000 yards of compost a year. That's a lot of compost. That might be over a little bit, but we make a lot of compost, and it's very high carbon compost, which gets us off the hook for a lot of the smelly, sticky, stinky problems. Early on, we did try and do some composting with sort of more high calories, so things like whey, for example. We got whey from Kraft for a while, and we got what was the other one? There was another thing that spent grains. For a long time we got spent grains, and spent grains are fantastic composting. And once we got the system figured out on how to handle them, and handle that potential nastiness, it worked really well. But the first time we tried to do spent grains, we quit because they were they turned from this like really pleasant sort of grainy oatmeal smelling thing into a horrible mass of stinky nastiness that they'll spread the smell across the whole. So those things are real, and really that can happen at any scale. I mean, I've seen backyard compost piles that are nasty, and it's just a management issue and having a good plan for carbon more than anything else. It's just making sure you have abundant carbon source that's reliable, and you have a way to incorporate that into your compost.
That's very good to know. Very insightful. Thank you. And actually, I think those are all of our questions. And I really, again, I appreciate your honesty, and I've always, really appreciated your transparency and your openness in sharing your trials and tribulations. So I know a lot of people will get something out of that. So thank you again for being here and for giving your time and expertise to this topic.
You bet. I'm always glad to share. And Rebecca, my door's open. So come on down and visit or come on up and visit sometime, and we'll walk and talk about compost and CSA and all that stuff. So we really, I'm glad to share it. And thank you all for participating. And I hope everybody gets a lot out of this.
All right. Have a nice night. Thank you, everyone. Take care.